over the last 2 decades, about 22 years now, Zimbabwe has been under Western sanctions. And ultimately, this has affected our capacity to import certain essential requirements. With regard to specific issues of food security, Zimbabwe, since independence, we have been importing our wheat for our bread from Ukraine, and our fertilizer from the Russian Federation.
Yes.
But now, fortunately, under the Second Republic, we introduced a model to say we need to have food security on the basis of our own domestic resources. So with regard to the importation of wheat from Ukraine, I'm happy to say in the past, Zimbabwe used to grow only about 3 months of supply of wheat for the country. And under the model we've introduced this last season, we have now been able to produce 13 months of wheat supply for Zimbabwe, which means we now have an excess of 1 month of wheat. And so the crisis relating to importation of wheat from Ukraine does not affect us. We are now on. With regard to the issue of grain which we eat, that is maize, corn, we also have a model where now we realize because of the issue of climate change in the country, we have introduced a program the last 2.5 years to 3 years now. In every single province in Zimbabwe, we are building dams. And we are also introducing irrigation. We need 360,000 hectares of land under irrigation. And we know that by next season, we will have completed that exercise, and we shall be sufficient with regard to grain again. Whether there is drought or there is no drought, we are achieving that goal. So, yes, we have challenges with regard to the issue of gas and fuel in Zimbabwe that we import. To some extent, the issues in Europe have affected us. But I think as an African country and as a continent, so many countries in Africa have gone under serious challenges. I'm aware of the challenges Zimbabwe has faced, but when we were facing these challenges, Europe went to sleep. They never bothered about the fact that an African country was facing challenges. And in my view, I don't know whether my colleagues will agree with me, but in my view, Zimbabwe will not fail to sleep because other countries in Europe have problems. But of course, the biggest challenge is the question of the pandemic.
Yes.
And you may be aware that when the pandemic visited the entire globe, many countries received support from the World Bank, IMF, the first world supporting many countries. Zimbabwe did not receive anything because we're an isolated country. We did the support from our own African brothers, not from outside Africa. So, as a result of that, we began to think outside the box.
Yeah.
We've provided our own PEs sufficient to deal with our own situation. And we also got to be squeezed on the question of accessing medical oxygen. And we put a group of scientists in our own country, and within 15 months, we are now in production of our own medical oxygen, and we have surplus for those who may want it. COP26 ended up with the third world countries, Africa and some countries in Asia, and so Latin America, on one side, and the first world on the other. And I may have misunderstood, but I felt that the first world was looking at us jumping, leapfrogging to embrace green energy, clean energy. And yet, they themselves, when they developed, there's a history of how they developed to where they are. And in that process, they used thermal power. And now we are at a stage where most of our African countries have coal and we use thermal power, and they were told this is dangerous. We, as my brother said, they made commitments. If indeed they honor the commitments, well and good, we'll then use their finance to generate green energy. But in the absence of that, I, for one, would not abandon using thermal power in order to modernize and industrialize Zimbabwe. I'm fully aware that as a result of the problems in Europe, some of the countries who are speaking at COP16 are going back to thermal power currently. So this is the example of double standards. It is critically important that we both understand it is necessary that, of course, we move on. But we must be allowed, be given transition, a reasonable transition to move away from thermal power to green energy. So it is my view that Africa, and in fact, I think that what is happening currently makes us in Africa to wake up. We have all the resources needed to develop our countries, from food security, fertilizer security. We have all the inputs. I'm happy that Tanzania has just said that they are building their fertilizer factory. And may I also announce that on Monday, 2 days ago, I commissioned the mine in Zimbabwe for the production of fertilizer. So Africa has the resources to be self-sufficient, to modernize our countries, to industrialize our countries, to mechanize our countries. All what is needed is cooperation, integration, and the sharing of experiences and our resources. If we did that, we will succeed. But I believe that when we go to COP27 in Egypt, end of this year, I have not done that the African voice will be one, that we must be allowed to be given sufficient transition period so that we move. But if they want us to leapfrog to their level, they must pay the cost.
I'm a king, yes, I'm a king, I'm a king,